Doug, welcome. You're coming to us from sunny California today, probably a little warmer than what we have here in DC.
It is 63 and not at all sunny. I'm right on the Pacific Ocean in Oceanside, California, north of San Diego, and it's foggy. I can't see the building next to me.
Well, it was 11 degrees when I walked to work this morning, so I think I think you're in a better situation for sure.
Yeah, I left this morning too, and it's a big change. Kind of nice.
Yep. All right, so Doug, tell us what's been on your mind.
Well, I've been thinking about the PRO Act again. I didn't ever want to think about the PRO Act again. This is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, an extremely pro-union piece of legislation. But it was brought back to my attention by the nomination of DeRamers as the labor secretary. And, you know, as a congresswoman, Chavez DeRamer was one of the few Republican advocates for the PRO Act. And it's a surprising choice, to say the least. So we took another look at the PRO Act and reran the numbers, and Emmett Bowling has a nice paper on it, and it's a pretty dramatic piece of legislation. It would do a couple of things. Number one, it would get rid of right-to-work laws in the state. So big federal preemption of right to work. It's not something that a lot of people are going to be comfortable with. The second is it would reclassify a lot of independent contractors as employees, and in the process make them qualify for full pay and benefits. So with the stroke of a pen, all those workers become more expensive, but the stroke of the pen doesn't create any more money for them. So you get some real disruption of things. And it puts into place a very strong version of the joint employer rule, which is just a threat to the franchise model that's been so successful in the United States. So, and there is more about making it easier to unionize, but the basic flavor is one which is, I think, really counterproductive. If you want to be pro-worker, that's fine, but this is not the way to help workers. People who want to be independent contractors can't be. People who want to have the right to work choice don't get it. It limits workers' choices and opportunities, and that's not the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I caught a little bit of that hearing today, and that seemed to be like one of the big points that a lot of the members on the Republican side, at least, cared about. I mean, they brought up, the 26 states have right-to-work laws.
Yeah.
The voters of that states have decided, so they want those laws. And then I think one of the big things that struck me from Emmett's piece the other day, or the update to the PRO Act piece, was, it would increase weekly employment costs by anywhere from 21.5 to 71.6 billion. And that's a lot.
Yeah, that's real money. There's no doubt about it. And, you can dig underneath and look at all the people who might be affected, and something like $2.8 trillion of GDP would be put at risk by this. So, again, this is the kind of thing where I ask, what problem are we trying to fix here? Right? What is this the solution to? It looks to be all downsides in my view.
Yeah, it seems like it's one of these things that just pops back up every once in a while. I mean, I remember back we did a two-part podcast with, I'm blanking on his name, but a guy we used to work with out of California, I believe, and it was with Isabel, and we talked about this, and then we've talked about this, time and time again. It seems like every couple of years it comes back up.
That was the late great Michael Lotito, right?
Yes. That was it. All right, let's turn to other news out there. So, we obviously the Congress is moving forward with their budget resolutions, the reconciliation process. Before we jump into the details of the House and Senate budgets, let's talk about reconciliation process. Walk us through what it is, why it's being used, and how its use impacts what Congress can and can't do in the budget process.
So reconciliation was created along with the Congressional Budget Office, the budget committees, and the Congressional budget process in the 1974 Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act. It was intended to be a fast-track procedure that allowed Congress to do hard things budgetarily. That is, raise taxes, cut spending. And the way it was a fast track was it essentially bypassed the rules of the Senate. It got rid of the filibuster by having a finite amount of debate, 50 hours. It got rid of the need for cloture as a result. You need only a simple majority to get the legislation passed. And so it was intended to be this sort of way to do hard things and not have one person stop it. All fine and good. Now, to get a reconciliation bill and have those votes, you have to pass a budget resolution in the House and the Senate with matching provisions for reconciliation, which are you tell each committee of jurisdiction what they have to do, how much taxes they have to raise, how much spending they have to cut, or vice versa. These are your instructions, and you pass that in the House, pass it in the Senate. Then the committees go off and do that. They produce legislation which has the actual policy in it. How do we raise taxes? How do we cut spending? And they report them back to the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee assembles all these pieces, and we got a reconciliation bill. And then you vote in the House and the Senate, and off you go. There are some pitfalls along the way. When you're voting on a budget resolution, there are unlimited amendments and a finite amount of debate. So you get to this thing at the end known as the vote-a-rama, where people are literally throwing an amendment in. There's no time to study it, and you have to vote. And it is turned into a great vehicle for gotcha votes that come back to haunt you in your next election or primary. So it has turned out that, number one, we don't do many budget resolutions because they have these bad gotcha votes in them. So you'll only really see a budget resolution now if they want to get reconciliation instructions. That only happens when you have the same party in the House and the Senate and they want to do it just with their votes. And then, and this is the most important recent development, what can be in the budget resolution or in the reconciliation bill to do budgetary things. And so the rules are that the elements be primarily budgetary in nature. But people want to put everything in there, and then they want the Senate parliamentarian who gets to decide this stuff to rule that it really is budgetary. So they tried to put an increase in the minimum wage in. The parliamentarian said, no, you can't do that. And this time around, the Republicans are going to try to put in some energy policy, which would be regulatory in nature. They're going to put in border policy. There's money there, but there's also policy there. And then taxes up and down. That's pretty straightforward. So we'll see what they can get into these reconciliation bills, and that'll be a part of the drama.
Yeah, there was one other rule that I think Jordan outlined that I maybe wasn't as familiar with, and that was the Conrad rule, which I believe that's what is that?
Create deficits using reconciliation.
Right. So that's the 10-year budget window that you can't.
So there are two rules. Sorry to interrupt, but there are two rules. The Conrad rule was in the 10-year budget window, you can't create deficits using reconciliation. It's supposed to do good things budgetarily. And the Byrd rule says you cannot create deficits beyond the 10-year window in reconciliation. And that is why the 2017 Tax Act is largely sunsetting, because it did in fact create deficits past the 10-year budget window. And the only way to fix that was to have provisions go away. So the Conrad rule is now gone. The Byrd rule remains. It was statutory they put it into the law. So that'll constrain things, no question about it. So that's the environment we're in. It's a very special process, and it allows very partisan things to get done. And if you list the most partisan things you've heard of recently, going back in time, there's the 17 Tax Act, there's the Affordable Care Act, there's the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, all of those were done with reconciliation.
Interesting. All right. So speeding up to this process, last week, the House and Senate budget committees each passed a budget resolution out of their committees, but there was significant difference between them. Right. Walk us through the two packages.
So the most important thing is they're different. And in the end, they have to land on the same budget resolution. They are worlds apart from one another. The Senate has a, quote, mini bill. It has just border security and energy provisions in it, no tax provisions whatsoever. And it can lose roughly $300, $500 billion, depending on how you look at it, in additional deficits over the next 10 years. Fairly compact. And largely non-budgetary in nature, and we'll see how that goes. Over in the House, we have the One Big Beautiful Bill approach, as the president named it, and it has tax and non-tax all in one package, and it can cut taxes by up to $4.8 trillion, but now they're talking about having $2 trillion of spending offsets. That number went from 1.5 when the budget resolutions were first introduced in committee to $2 trillion during the budget committee vote. So it's been moving a little bit as we've watched the process.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so you alluded to this a little bit. How the House and the Senate need to agree. They need to be on the same budget resolution. So how do we get there?
Good question. Just before I got on a plane and went to foggy California, the president sided with the House bill and said Republicans should support that. This on the very day that the Senate was going to begin deliberation on their bill. So I don't know what they've elected to do going forward, whether they're going to continue to introduce that on the floor and take votes and do the deliberation. I suspect they will. But either they go through with their bill and then do another one and they merge them up in the House, or the House bill comes over and they simply adopt it. I think is important. There are a lot of details that are going to be complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the main details of this, though, one of the big differences is how they are going to do the TCJA. I mean, you know, the House has said that they want it to be a permanent. The Senate's probably, you know, a little iffy on that. How might that end up?
So let's dive right into the weeds and drive the listeners crazy. So how do they get on the same bill? First question. Both are using the 2025 budget resolution. We're already in the middle of that fiscal year, and they would have the option going forward to do a 2026 budget resolution. So if the Senate decided to do this in two bites, they would have to do two budget resolutions. For them to get on the same page, I don't think they can now go backwards and amend the 2025 budget resolution. It is what it is. So they would have to get the House to agree to do the 2026 one in the same way that they are. I think that's a detail that needs to be worked out, and maybe standing down might be the right thing for the Senate as opposed to going forward. So that's sort of key piece number one. Second piece is the notion of permanence. It could be permanent if it doesn't create deficits beyond the 10-year budget window. How could you do that? Well, what the Senate would like to do is to use a current policy baseline. The current policy on taxes is the 2017 reform. And if you simply extended that for 10 years, you would be doing nothing new and thus creating no deficits, and it could be done permanently. Anything beyond just extending the 2017 Act, you would have to somehow offset. So the president did make a lot of commitments on the campaign trail for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, a long list. Anything like that came in, they would have to find offsets for it to be permanent. That's not where anyone is. None of the budget resolutions that are on the floor are using a current policy baseline. It looks to me like the Senate wanted to hold on to that option for a tax-only bill later in the year. The House has a current law baseline. Under current law, when TCJA sunsets, taxes go up by about 4.5 to 5 trillion, depending on who estimates it. And when you undo that, you create $4.5 to $5 trillion of deficits. There's no way they're going to come up with offsets for that. So there's no way the House approach gives you permanence. So there's a big difference in how they're doing it.
Interesting. Okay. So, all right. That clears that up. So, okay, let's say that we either get on the one big beautiful bill, we pass a budget resolution. What happens after that we have the committees get their instructions?
The committees then figure out how to meet their instruction. If their instruction is just create $4.5 to $5 trillion of deficits, they can just extend TCJA. That's change all the dates in the legislation. Done. If they're going to do more, they have to actually craft the legislative language to do that. And if they create more deficits than they're allowed to in their instruction, they have to start searching around in their jurisdiction for ways to offset it. One of the big offsets would be to repeal the tax cuts known as credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. Tons of clean energy tax credits, all in the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. So when they start going past their allotted deficit creation, they can start offsetting with those IRA tax credits.
Interesting. Well,
and that'll be going on in every committee. People have different instructions. So financial services is supposed to reduce deficits by $1 billion. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know what's in the jurisdiction. I'm watching that eagerly.
Yeah, I mean, energy and commerce has been the other one that I've seen quite a bit of. They'll have to do some stuff. So
they have $800 billion, almost $900 billion in deficit reduction they need to do, and there's been a presumption by many that this means touching Medicaid. The president last night said Medicaid's off the table, so I don't know how they're going to get to 880. That's going to be hard.
It'll be interesting to watch this all play out. So I'm sure we'll have many more conversations about this as we continue moving through this process. Doug, I don't have a trivia question for you today, so you're off the hook.
So I'll give you a bonus then. Here's the one thing we didn't talk about that's worth watching. The House put an increase in the debt limit in their budget resolution, and the Senate did not. The thing that's most interesting about that is that's a great statement of faith in the timing by the House, because you got to raise the debt limit by late spring, early summer. The X date's out there is somewhere in late May, early June, we think. And so if that's how you're going to raise the debt limit, you got to be done by then. I don't think there are many people who believe we can do the tax piece that quickly. So keep an eye on the debt limit and where it's going to pop back up. It's got to get done somewhere.
We're already in extraordinary. We've already hit. We're just using those measures to keep it under at this point, right?
Yes, we're right at 25 million under because they keep it there as a matter of their policies.
Not to mention the deadline to fund the government's coming up too. So plenty of things to watch that are indirectly related to this process.
I have said for a while, and I believe it to be true, that everyone's focused on the things they want to do. I'm more focused on things they have to do. They have to fund the government. They have to raise that or suspend the debt ceiling. The clock's ticking on both of those, and they're hard things to do. And meanwhile, they're confirming nominees, and other stuff comes up. You don't always get to just do the reconciliation process. It has to fit into the other workload.
Interesting. Well, Doug, thanks for taking some time on your trip out to California to talk to us about this. No sports talk today, but luckily there's not really much to talk about.
The Steelers quarterback situation remains unchanged. See you next week.
Talk to you soon, Doug.
All right.
All right, let's turn to tariffs now. Jacob, welcome back.
Great to be back again.
Becoming a frequent guest on this podcast.
Seems like every week's a big week.
Yeah, every week we learn more about this whole tariff agenda. Let's just jump right into it. The president announced a 25% tariff on global steel and aluminum products since the last time we talked. Walk us through the impact there.
Yeah, so this was announced last week, I believe February 10th. It's set to take effect on March 12th, so about a month until these actually go into effect. The thing here that's different is this was done in the first term of Trump in 2018. There was steel and aluminum tariffs. This is kind of an expansion of that, and it's supposed to eliminate any exemptions for countries. So last time around, Mexico and Canada and a few other countries were exempted from tariffs, which kind of dialed down the overall cost. But this time around, no one's exempt. We'll see if that remains the case.
Yeah, so that's just an across-the-board type situation.
Right. And last time around, it was about a few $1 billion that were subject to tariffs. This time around, it's going to be about a couple 100% increase from that.
What that has a serious impact on the economy.
Right. It's going to be a huge impact for businesses mainly, since U.S. consumers aren't really importing steel and aluminum.
Mm-hmm. What industries generally, maybe you just to bring it to the concrete, are most impacted by this?
Well, one that I can think of is canned foods, anything canned, maybe bottles, Coca-Cola cans, things like that. Those are going to increase.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. We also have these reciprocal tariffs that President Trump announced. He announced he will impose a reciprocal tariff on other countries. What is this about?
Yeah, so that was, again, another big piece of news last week, huge news last week. What this means is if a country has a 10% tariff on U.S. imports, then the United States will match that tariff and put a 10% tariff on imports from that country. So it's just a kind of a let's match whatever other countries do.
So wait, does that mean when they have a reciprocal tariff in response to our original tariffs, that we're now going to add another tariff on top of that because they're reciprocal, even if they're reciprocal tariffs?
It's possible. The main question here is it going to be a country by country tariff? So if the average tariff of a country is 10%, will our tariff on all their products be 10%, or it'll be product by product? So some products might be 5%, others might be 2%. That's unknown, and that would be a huge headache for administrative.
Just figuring that out for businesses would just be a pain, and time consuming for that matter.
And it'd be huge costs from to the United States and U.S. consumers. It would almost triple the current average tariff of the United States if this went into effect.
Yeah. Okay, so and then one thing that I think came out a few days ago is the president also suggested that we could broaden the scope of tariffs to autos, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. Right. What would the impact of these tariffs be?
Yeah, so the United States obviously gets a lot of these products imported. About $200 billion in cars, $150 billion in medications and vaccines, and another $50 billion in semiconductors and circuits. So that's hundreds of billions of dollars just right off the bat. And a 25% tariff, that's looking at around like $60+ billion in additional annual costs to consumers.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just an astonishing. All three of those put together, I mean, that's just going to have a major impact on the economy, and especially as we're trying to continue to still fight inflation and all the other things we're trying to do.
And it's unclear if it's going to happen anytime soon or if it's going to happen sometime in April.
I can't imagine that the lack of clarity on when these go into effect has to make businesses happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's already companies that are starting to preemptively raise their prices.
Just in anticipation of this? Wow, so it's already having an effect even though they're not even there yet.
Right.
Wow. All right. Well, Jacob, thanks for joining us to talk about this. I'm sure that we will continue this conversation going forward as we learn more and get more certainty on all these issues.
Great. Can't wait to be back.